Welcome to It's Good to Talk, the podcast that equips parents with conversations they need to have. My name is Emma McLean. I'm an executive coach. I work exclusively with working parents. Working and having a family is darn hard. And a way to get through this time in your life is to have better conversations. It's to talk about it. I believe that hope is not a strategy. Asking for what you need is. And that's why it's good to talk. Let's get into it. Hello, it's your friend Emma, and today I am delighted to welcome onto the podcast, It's Good to Talk, Anna Johnstone. And Anna is actually the OG of podcasts. Anna actually has a very successful podcast. If you haven't heard it, she'll tell us more about it. But it's called The Female Career, and it's really how I first met Anna, and she very kindly interviewed me on that podcast. So I'm turning the tables on her. And she interviewed me when I was just a little baby, freshly unwrapped executive coach. And I think we had kind of come across each other and felt we were aligned in some kind of areas. She reached out, and through the years I've always had a very nice friendship with Anna. I met her in Christchurch once when I went down there for a leadership conference, and in real life. And I think it's a general life thing. I think that it works when we all lift each other up, and I think that that's how I see Anna, is that she really particularly lifts women up. And I will let her introduce herself because I'm just stealing all her thunder. But I am really excited for our conversation. Welcome, Anna. How would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Thank you, Emma, and great to be here. As you said, it is turning the tables on me. I'm probably more comfortable asking the questions than answering the questions, but I will do my best today. So yeah, a little bit about me. I am born and bred in Ōtautahi in Christchurch, where I did a master's in psychology originally. So always been interested in people and conversations. So when you suggested this podcast, I thought it's right up my street. But after studying, I lived and worked for 17 years overseas, mostly in Europe. Worked for Shell, so in oil and gas and regional and then global HR roles. Did my MBA over in Switzerland, did an amazing business school called IMD, and then worked for Mars, the chocolate company, in sort of sales and marketing director roles. So kind of corporate career. Along the way, I had a couple of babies. So my first two boys, I've now got three kids who are 15, 13 and 8. And then about 10 years ago now, got to the point where I saw lots of amazing women around me who were either opting out or feeling like they were being pushed out of work, and thought, I want to do something about this. And what can I bring into this space? So that's when I got into executive coaching, and my focus has always been on women. I love the way you described it around lifting women up. That is exactly what I hope to do through the coaching. And then 5 years ago, I returned back home to Aotearoa and launched my business here, The Female Career. And so it still has at the heart of it executive coaching for women, leadership coaching, career coaching, supporting women to thrive in their careers. And then also started up the podcast, The Female Career, which over 100 stories of Kiwi women and their careers. And that was, when we talk about conversations, it was designed to be, imagine you were taking these women out for a coffee and you were having a chat about their career and being able to ask them questions. Now, of course, you can't do that with, each woman can't do that with 1,000 other women. That would be a lot of coffees. But instead, how could you replicate that in a podcast in terms of people being able to have those coffee conversations? And the other part of our business now, and one that I'm also really passionate about, is actually what changes can we make to the system to improve gender balance at work? So whether it's in terms of measuring and closing the gender pay gap, or improving flexible working, or enhancing parental leave, or creating a more inclusive environment, it's that as well. So yeah, very passionate about gender balance, but also very passionate about the connections that people make and the difference that can make to people's lives too.
Oh, incredible, incredible work. I will put the link to Anna's business and to her podcast in the show notes so everyone can check that out. You know, a big corporate career, lived for a long time in Europe, started a family, came home. I mean, three children. That's a lot. And your firstly, what I'm curious about, where I'd like to start first, is your if you put your own sort of working parent hat on, and actually, I don't know, I can't remember if you introduced if you have a partner or not, but
I do,
I'm sure.
yes. Yep.
Yes, go.
Married to Mike. Yep.
Excellent. I would love to know, for you as a working parent, where you've navigated periods where you've probably been in paid work and been out of paid work, and you have a partner as well, who may have been doing the same navigation. For you as a parent, when you reflect so far, what conversations do you think have been important for you to have, either with your partner, with yourself, with friends, with employers? What are the conversations that have stood out for you so far?
Yeah, great question. I always knew I wanted to be a working parent. I always knew I wanted to combine both work and being a mum. But life is busy, absolutely. So, with three boys, energetic boys, that's a busy home life as well. I think were a couple of kind of types of conversations that were probably particularly helpful for me, especially in those early days as a working parent. One was actually kind of very early days. So either before I was even pregnant or as I was early stage pregnant before I had my babies. It was those practical tips from mums who'd been there and done that. And what were the kind of really gritty, useful pieces of advice that they had for you that you only get by kind of knowing somebody and sitting down and having that coffee and the conversation with them. And so it was really practical things. I remember one woman who'd already had two kids, but they were still young, sat me down and said, look, I know you're pregnant, but are you thinking about having a second baby? And I was like, I mean, you're pregnant with my first, tag about. And she said, no, look, the reason I say this, and she said, we're very lucky. It was a colleague who worked at the same company with me. She said, we're very lucky. We have generous parental leave here. And when you're on parental leave, you also accrue holiday. And she said, are you thinking about coming back to work part-time or full-time after your first baby? And I said, I think part-time because, I'd like to spend some time with him when he's little. She said, don't do that. Come back full-time, because if you're thinking about having another baby fairly soon, then when you go on your second parental leave, you'll come back, you'll get that parental leave paid on full pay. And so it was such good practical advice. And she said, just use your accrued holiday that you have and take a day, when you need it, so that you're just working 4 days. Now, that was when I was in the UK with an employer who had generous parental leave. It's not always the case here in Aotearoa. We're pretty behind in terms of the support for parental leave. But more employers are getting on the bus. And if you do have that opportunity, it was just a great kind of piece of practical advice. The other pieces of kind of advice, I guess, that I got from people, which were really helpful, one was around seeing childcare and paying for childcare, seeing that as an investment in your career. And I think previously I thought about it as a cost that I was somehow having to weigh up, is it worth me going back to work or not? But instead saying that between myself and my husband, we were both working, both earning, that's an investment in the next 30, 40 years of my career. If I'm able to stay and continue progressing during this period of time, by having the right childcare support around me, then that's a great investment rather than seeing it as a cost. So that was, again, really good practical advice. The other piece of advice that is for me, and I say it all the time, is kids get sick. And they, unfortunately, especially young kids, if you're returning back to work after a period of parental leave, they're going into daycare, they're around lots of kids with other, snotty noses, they're going to come home and they're going to be sent home, and you're going to, either you, your partner, if you have one, are going to need to look after them. And figuring that out up front with your partner, if you have one, or figuring it out with your support crew around you about how you'll navigate that so that it doesn't come as a surprise, so you're kind of prepared and ready to go. If you have got family around you, that's great. When I was over in the UK, I didn't. And so it was about having those options to call on. the other piece of advice somebody gave me was have a backup to yourself and your partner, just in case on the day your child is sick, you both have something really important that you're doing for work, but also have a backup for your backup. So you've got at least two options that you can call on if at that moment in time you need them. But there's also, I guess, within that an important conversation that if you do have a partner, to have beforehand around what happens when our kids get sick and who is going to look after them, who's going to take that time, how are we going to share that out, and how do we decide on the day about what happens. So those are kind of some of those practical conversations that were really helpful to me. But there's, I guess, a whole nother set of conversations with other people who are in the trenches with you, kind of your crew. I found it super helpful to be talking with other working mums who were doing their best to try and keep a fulfilling career where they were progressing, as well as trying to be great mums to their kids. And those conversations were more like, oh, it's really hard, isn't it? You know, like, this is really tough and I'm struggling. And the ones you could have a glass of wine with, have a cry with, that it feels okay to say it's all a bit much. And that person's not going to come and try and solve it for you. They're just going to be there to say, look, I get it. I understand. I'm here with you. And for me, having that kind of crew, that support network was and still is important.
Oh, gold. I love that. Two kind of sides to that answer. Number one, reaching out for gritty, useful advice. And I love that, right? Because I think what I've seen in my work is, there's not many spaces where we're talking about gritty, useful advice. Mostly we're just kind of smiling wryly and going, well, you're not going to get much sleep, and I think that, like, when you reach out to people that have done this before, I don't think you have to do everything that they say or share with you, but I think it's about gathering lots of different sources of information to figure out what feels right for you and your family. And so I really love that. I really love your thought around childcare as an investment in your career, because boy, childcare is expensive, and we both know it is definitely not a cost that should be compared to one person's salary. If you are going to look at it as a cost, it's across a family salary. And I also love this thought around kids get sick. It's not if, it's when. And so be proactive. Be proactive with your partner. Be proactive with building backups to backups. I feel like that's understudies to understudies, which I love. And again, I think that's a really great conversations to have with your partner, with your village if you have around you, and also with your manager, like, to just kind of make sure it's all covered off, because in the moment, the stress is huge. So I love that. And then, feeling less alone by finding your people that you can kind of, have a cry with. I mean, my experience is only as a mum, but I think mums are quite good at that. My question is what's your experience been for dads in terms of finding their people? I mean, do you have any observations on that, either as a coach or as a parent? Because I feel like it's really important for dads to be having conversations as well.
I think it is really important. And I think so often dads are left out of this conversation because they're not the ones carrying the baby, and they're maybe not the ones taking parental leave unless somehow your employer is generous in that space. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case for my husband. In terms of our first two kids, it was 2 weeks of paid leave, and that was it. I think it was paid, maybe not unpaid. No, I think it was paid. But I think in terms of my husband, and he is very lucky. He's got a good sort of set of close friends that he's had since he was a teenager. But at the point in time when he became a dad, they were mostly still back here in Aotearoa in New Zealand. And so he didn't kind of have necessarily that support network in those early days. What was, I think, quite good is he got involved at his place of work. There was a family network And so he got involved with that and actually ended up chairing the network, which again, I think is great to have guys stepping up into those visible roles, to then have some of those conversations. And then people felt more comfortable to come and chat to him because he was talking very openly about the experiences and how tough it was, and whether it is the lack of sleep or as they get older, some of the, how do you deal with it if your child's feeling anxious about school, or how do you deal with sleeping challenges if they're not sleeping through the night, or how do you deal with, say, if your child's got learning difficulties, all those things that are important to talk about as a parent. I think if you start having some of those conversations then as a guy, then I think it's great. My experience, probably he's better at talking about the practical stuff than maybe the emotional experiences of being a parent and how that changes you and your identity. But I think probably what I've observed in him is, it's what I've seen sometimes in other men, is that sometimes being a parent can create this sense of pressure and responsibility and, let's say, burden, but of providing for your family, which is that sort of societal expectation. Like, why does that have to sit with the guy? Shouldn't it, ideally be shared across many? But they don't always talk about that, and about the extra pressure that puts on them and the emotional toll that might be taking on them.
I totally agree, and I think it's so powerful for a dad to lead a conversation like that, particularly in the workplace. This is called It's Good to Talk, because what I've realized in my coaching work, and I wanted to ask you, but so many of the ways forward when you're in tricky situations in your life, the amount of times, I'll be asking a client to kind of, what are you taking away from this conversation? And they'll say, I just need to have a proper conversation. And I think that it's for both dads and mums to have these, whatever a proper conversation looks like for you, rather than just wishing or hoping or putting a note on a shared calendar, because this stuff is hard, right?
Yeah, it's really hard. And often those conversations are limited to, who's picking this kid up from football, and who's cooking dinner tonight, and who's replied to the parent-teacher evening invite, limited to those kind of functional conversations, which are probably easier to have. And they're still important to have in terms of who's taking the load of dealing with those different things that come with having kids. But maybe the conversations we don't have so much are around, what do we want out of life, and what's important to us as a family, and where do you see your career going? Where do you see your career going? Having those conversations. What are you ambitious for? What are your goals? What are you excited about for this year? How can I support you better? What do you need in place to help make that happen? Those are probably, it's easy to have the who's doing the pickups conversation. It's harder probably to have those. Look, where are we in terms of our life goals and ambitions, and are we still kind of on track together?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I'd rather have the who's picking up blah blah from hockey than what do you want from life.
Those are good conversations, right?
What about conversations, that you've had as a working parent that, you feel like you wish you'd had sooner? You didn't really know you needed to have them. They might be conversations that kind of happen after a big sort of crescendo of some kind. But what are the conversations that you would recommend people have? Working parents.
Working parents. I think to have conversations with people who are making it work, but not making it work perfectly, because nobody makes it work perfectly. But to have those conversations with people about, look, what are they doing to make it work? I think it's really easy to have conversations about, this is really hard, or it's easy to, for a lot, I often see, particularly more senior people, talking about, actually, this can be quite tough. But instead having those conversations about what do you do to make it work? And as an example, so one of the women I was coaching, and she's quite upfront about, she's very lucky, she works in a senior executive role, so she has the privilege and the salary to be able to afford to pay for support around her. But But what she's chosen to do is to invest some of that money in getting some support around her to do the things for her family that she probably gets less fulfillment from. So, for example, like getting somebody to come and help with the washing and the cleaning, getting somebody to come in and cook the kids' meals a couple of times a week. And that means that then when she is there and the precious time that she has with her children, she's able to really enjoy it. And I think sharing that so that we don't kind of have this impression that actually these are these amazing parents who are somehow managing to do it all themselves. They're not. They often are doing it with a support network, whether it's paid or whether it's whānau or a village. I think that's kind of important conversations to have. And also for people to share, I probably wasn't always as good as I could have been at putting boundaries in place about putting myself first and what I needed. But hearing people where they have put that in place, and actually that's been really well respected, and it was better to be very clear up front and about how they held that boundary. So I had another colleague, she was in a global senior exec role, and she said, I don't want to be away from my kids much overnight. That's that's something that's really important to me. But I recognise I sit in a global role. So she said, across the course of the year, I will do 40 nights away from home, and that is it. Once those 40 nights are used up, there are no more. And so that boundary for her, and she worked it through with her employer, was something that she really carefully protected. So it was really good to have those conversations about how she set up that boundary, how she had the conversations, and how she protected that as well. Probably for me personally, when I came back to work after I'd had my second child, it was really, really hard. And they were pretty close together, only 22 months apart. And I, at the time, working a big job, it was a new job for me, it was a 3-hour commute every day that I was doing to get to work. It was an area of function of the business that was under a fair bit of pressure. Pretty quickly, it wasn't working. And I just kind of put my head down and kept going. And I wished I'd had some conversations, or maybe I wish I'd maybe listened. I'm not sure that many people told me it wasn't working, but maybe I wish I had listened a bit better if people were trying to tell me that. But probably some of those conversations to be upfront about the fact it's not working. And then actually have some upfront conversations about what could change to make it work. And what I think I did is I let it run to the point where I was completely burnt out and pretty broken by the end of that. And it took me a long time to rebuild afterwards. And by the time I came to have that conversation, it wasn't a very useful one with work because I just wasn't in the right kind of space or frame of mind to have it. So I wish I'd realised earlier probably that it wasn't working and had some conversations to try and make that better. To that point around conversations that kind of I wish I'd had sooner, I think probably so at that point in time, I took some time out and then went back to running my own business. And that was an interesting dynamic with my husband, where he's working a corporate job, very stable income, whereas me, my own business, if I need to take time off, that's fine, I can do that, it's my own business, but I also don't get paid. So it ended up probably shifting the dynamic in that I became more the default parent. And I wish we had had sooner some conversations about maybe the resentment that was starting to build within that feeling, and that all the roles that all the reasons that a career is important. Yes, it's great in terms of money and financial security and financial freedom and independence, but it's also about your identity and your joy and getting challenged and getting social connection and all those things that kind of having a career brings you. And so probably I didn't raise those as early as I probably should have done, let that run a little bit too long. And we came back from that in terms of rebalancing, but I probably wish I'd had that one sooner too.
Oh, wow. Wow. They are such beautiful stories to gift us. I mean, what beautiful reflections and powerful lessons to pass on. When I listened to you talk that back, the first example about like figuring out what you need and having the courage to ask for it, and the client example you gave, while acknowledging privilege of being able to get someone in to do the washing and all that, I just want to acknowledge that even when we have the privilege of being able to afford that, sometimes the belief we have, which is that's my job as a mum, is even stronger. Do you know what I mean? So I just love that example. And when you were saying that, I was thinking that for me, even if you put aside being able to pay for stuff, I remember the actual task of figuring out what you need is a job, right? And I remember once when I had three kids under 5 and we were both working full time, or I mean, I might have been working 4 days, but it was a lot. And I said to my husband, do you know what I need? I need every Sunday for you to take all of the kids out between 9 and 12. And I don't care where you go, but I need to be by myself. And I used to call it my decompression time. And I just didn't want anyone to be touching me or questions around where the scissors are or stuff like that. And that was gold for us, because I could make a lasagna, I could put a podcast on, I could sort through drawers of a 4-year-old that still has 6-month-old stretch and grows in it. But I think this whole conversation as a family, or if you are partnered, of what do we both need? What do we both need to move through? And your story about the role that just wasn't working, or the return to work that wasn't working, the power of listening to your voice. Because it might not have been other people telling you, but you might have known deep down, I guess, that it wasn't working. But you just kind of powered on.
Because that's what I'd always done. But it didn't work in those circumstances. That did make me laugh, though, Emma, hearing you. But I've still got those drawers where my youngest is now 8, but I think he's probably still got some 4-year-old things sitting in his drawers. And I always think I must get to that, but never quite do. I'd rather go out and go for a walk in the sun sometimes.
Yeah, well, you're a much cleverer person than I am. But no, I mean, it used to just drive me slightly batty because they would pull, how kids, when they go through drawers, they just pull things out like a magician pulling, handkerchiefs out of a hat. And I was like, well, if it doesn't fit you, could we get it out of the room? But apparently not. And I've still got old children that do the same thing. So that's a parenting podcast, and we're not running that. So I'm happy for that. What about, is your capacity as an executive coach and thinking about coaching female leaders, what themes do you think you've observed in your practice around conversations that have helped women at work? Let's frame it up like that. Are there themes of conversations that have helped women get what they want from work or life?
I mean, I think the first conversation that helps, and it doesn't have to be with a coach, but it probably has to be with somebody who's a great listener and who you trust, is allowing space for that conversation of what do you want, what is important to you. Because I know I do it. I go through life, busy, don't often stop to think about those things and about what really matters to me. And that's a conversation you can't really have fully with your boss if you're employed, because they'll have their own agenda in mind and they'll probably give you some advice to, from their own perspective. It can be difficult sometimes if you do have a partner to have it with your partner, because they've got their own thing, and then maybe thinking more about the family, or they're thinking about the impact that it has on them. Friends can be good to have it with, as I said, particularly if they're a really good listener, but often they'll jump in with some advice. I guess the benefit of coaching is that it's a completely non-judgmental, unbiased, safe, supportive, encouraging space that allows you to figure out what's really important to you. And so I would say, in terms of kind of an underlying theme of my work with women who are working parents, is just giving them that space to say, well, what about me in all of this? I've kind of maybe lost me a bit and what is important to me. And sometimes within that comes that kind of the magic, the gold, where somebody says, like, I've always dreamed of doing this. It often reignites for somebody an ambition or a hope or a dream that they'd forgotten about, or that they'd tucked behind everybody else's. So giving, kind of first and foremost, giving that space to help somebody figure out what that might be has been probably a common theme across the coaching that I do. I think there is often at that period when people, and I don't think this is when people become parents, and maybe this is possibly more for women than for men, it, the going to work becomes harder somehow because if you have kids at home, you are leaving them somewhere else you're making a choice there and somewhere to put yourself, but it's often putting them first because you're earning money for the family. But that becomes really hard. Sometimes if you've got a small person who's crying and clinging to your leg as you're dropping them off at nursery, and I had that for years, that becomes really hard when you're making that decision still to go into work. And in coaching, having those conversations about what do people need to keep them in? What do people need to keep them engaged and excited about their career? So that, yes, obviously the financial side is really important, but what else? Because your work does give you so many things. Helping them to see what it is that they need and then helping support them. You talked about kind of courage before, but courage to ask for what it is that is going to make a difference. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a big thing. Often for women I work with, it may well be just some more clarity on their roles and responsibilities so that they know what's kind of in and out of the scope of their job. Or maybe it's the ability to be able to start early, finish early, 1 day a week so that they can do the pickups. Or maybe it is to go on some kind of professional development course that they really feel is going to help them grow and progress. But helping them to make sure that work feels fulfilling and challenging and that they're growing and developing and they're figuring out what they need to do that. The other thing which I found has been really fascinating recently, so typically my coaching work is with more senior women, but I got asked by an organisation that I work with to come in and coach their graduates, which was very different for me. So I said yes, because I thought it would be a nice challenge and a nice chance to sort of see actually how's the next generation thinking. And different conversations to probably what I expected to be having. My generation's probably more, you get your head down, you get stuck in, you work hard, you climb up, that's what you do. There's some really interesting conversations about balance and life that were coming through from those women in their early and mid-20s. But what I was also fascinated to see is that for many of those women, they were already thinking about the impact having a family might have on their career. And I don't know if I found that they were enlightened or that it was sad. I wasn't quite sure which way to look at it in terms of that already influencing their career choice and their career decisions. And that maybe I wasn't coaching any men, so I don't know if they were having those same thoughts, but my guess is maybe not. And so women already making and thinking about their career paths over 5, 10, 15 years, but how do they engineer that so that it can still work with the family that they knew they wanted to have one day. So yeah, I thought that's good that they're openly having those conversations, but probably continuing to encourage women to often with women to say, well, what is it that you want out of your career? Where do you want to go? And how can you make your life then work around that? And because work is just part of life. So how do you make those things work together rather than starting off by saying, I want flexibility or I want to work part-time or that's just going to be too tricky. Instead saying, right, well, I'll do the hard thing and what do I need then to make that hard thing work for the other stuff that's in my life as well?
Yeah. Gold. What do I want? Like, that is such a good conversation. And you're right, it is a very useful conversation to have with someone who doesn't really know you. Like someone you can be honest with. There is no judgment. You can really be you, even if you don't know who you are anymore. But I love that. And then what do I need to stay in? So important because, when you talked about that story of little people clinging to your legs at drop off and then you arriving into work and trying to look onto it and professional and not like your heart is torn up into pieces. And I was reflecting with a friend about this. Again, the power of talking with friends to make you feel seen. And, if you do that for years, if you do that for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, it actually, you don't really feel how heartbroken you are, but you probably still are. And we're working in a system that's a setup, right? And so finding your people, being able to talk about that and realizing that, to your point, this is hard. And we're not going to complain about how hard it is, but I think we need to know that, like, it's called the fifth trimester, leaving our babies behind when we go back to work. And it's a real thing. So just know that, everyone, this is real. Final question for you, my friend, which I honestly, so much gold in this conversation. If you could tell working parents to have one conversation that if you're going to have any conversation, and it can be a conversation with all the different people we've talked about, so it could be friends, colleagues, partners, managers, yourself, what would that conversation be?
Oh, that's a big question.
I know. Well, I love big questions.
Good. I'm going to cheat on your question and I'm going to come back with 3. But
that's fine. You're the boss. You're the boss. The customer is always right.
But the first conversation I would make sure you have, whether it's with yourself, whether it is with a trusted person, is, look, what's my ambition? What am I ambitious for? What are my goals? What are my dreams? What are my hopes? And so that you know what that is, and to try and work towards that. I would say it's, if you have a partner at home, to have those important conversations about career and each of your hopes and dreams and ambitions for your career, and also around the home and about who's going to do what. Now, I'm not always great on this, but that it can quite easily slip into quite traditional roles if you're not careful. And so having those conversations to make sure that as a working parent, you've both got the time and the space that you need to look after yourselves, to be there for your family, and to give what you want to give to your workplace. In terms of work, I would encourage working parents to continue to have the conversations with their bosses, their employers, their colleagues around them that are about how can I keep progressing, and sometimes that, and you'll know this obviously, Emma, well, that after women have children, often we're seen as being put on the mummy track and maybe not considered for roles that require travel, or that might require, exciting projects that need late nights, or that require somebody to kind of go above and beyond in some way, or have kind of high degree of client contact, for example. But instead having those conversations with your employer to say, actually, I want to keep progressing, so that they know that you are in the game. They're not and often I see it's from a really good intentioned place, which is, we want to support you, we don't want to put too much pressure on you, so we won't ask you to do these extra things. And then what happens is you end up resentful and frustrated because you're maybe not getting the opportunity you wanted to. And your employer thinks, oh, it's a pity, that person had so much potential, what's happened. Instead, to have that upfront conversation to say, look, I still want to be challenged, I still want exciting, fulfilling work, I still want to keep growing and progressing in my career, and to make sure that you're visible and that you're making sure your employer knows that you want those opportunities.
Oh, I love those. She's gone with a 1 into 3, which I like, because look, we're not following rules here. No, I don't take sorries, so we're not apologising for that.
I just got to think just one. I was like, they're all important, so I'll put all 3 out here.
Ambition. What do you want? What's in your plan? What's your view? It's a really good conversation. It's a good conversation to have continually, right? Because I say to my clients, give yourself permission to change your mind. We don't have to set sail for one course. We can adjust for the wind. Number 2, intentional conversations at home. I think that's really, really important, and it changes your whole life. And then number 3, how might I continue to progress? What might we do to enable me to progress? And I think we, being friendly and annoying about that, like, how might I continue to progress on 4 days a week? Full stop, silence. I mean, like, Like, we need more innovation. So we need to be the people that are demanding it, really. So I love all those conversations. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for so generously sharing your decades of experience and observations and insights and gritty practical advice. So many people will love this episode. They will be shouting at their little Bluetooth speaker about how much they agree with what you were saying. And I just want to say thank you for your leadership, because you've definitely been someone that I've looked up to. And I've tried not to have major imposter syndrome as a coach when I've been asking you questions as like a guru coach and trying to shut up. But I just want to say thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it today.
So thank you, Emma, and thank you for all the work that you do in terms of supporting working parents. That I know from having seen and spoken to people who've worked with you, you just have such a wonderful, no-nonsense, high energy, but approach that gives people the courage to have some of those tough conversations about the boundaries that they want to set, or the needs that they have as they return to work. And that is fantastic to have. And also your work in terms of the part-time power list, which I love. I see it in the work that we do in terms of the gender pay gap, where you see that on average there is a gender pay gap in terms of part-time roles. How do we make it okay for those senior roles to be part-time? And so that power list shines a light and makes people see that it's possible. So awesome work. Well done.
Kia ora. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Emma.
Thank you for listening to this episode of It's Good to Talk. This podcast was brought to you by Works for Everyone. It's the business that I own, your host, Emma McLean. We are a company that partners with progressive businesses to help support their mums and dads in the workplace and at home through innovative leadership programs, executive coaching, and keynote speaking. I hope you did like this episode. If you did, please follow on your favorite podcast platforms, share with a friend, and if you want to know any more information, check out Works for Everyone on Instagram or on the interweb. Until next time, remember, it's good to talk.